Booktube, we are back. Let's go over all the books that are rated 5 stars, and even some books that broke my scale, transcended the 5 star, and got the elusive 6 star. And books that, if they're not on your TBR list, they should be on your TBR list. Before we get into the books, 5 star books are books that I hold near and dear to me, and that rating is something that I do not give out lightly, as well as the elusive 6 star. And those are books that break my scale, and those books will be at the end of this video. In terms of how we're going to break this video down, we're going to have 3 separate sections. So the first section will be my favorite genre, which is fantasy. The next section will be sci-fi, which is my second favorite genre, and is slowly but surely becoming, it's fighting with fantasy a little bit there. And then the last one will be thrillers and more. So it'll include some thrillers, as well as it will include some self-help books that, I have to put on this list there. And like I said, at the end of the video, we'll go over the elusive 6-star books that just transcend everything. And I'm sure some of you will agree on those books. And we'll kind of go from there. So the 5-star book criteria for me fit into 5 different buckets here. And I really stick to this criteria when it comes to giving a 5-star book. Now the book has to hit all these 5 criteria here. It can't just have 1, can't just have 2, it has to hit all 5 of them. So the first criteria that a book needs to have is compelling characters. I am a character first reader. I love characters. If you follow me for a while, if you follow me on TikTok, follow me on, here on BookTube, you know that characters are how I really enjoy a book. If I don't enjoy the characters, or even if I don't hate the characters enough, it probably won't be a 5-star for me. And that has to be the first criteria that passes. And in each and every one of these books, they have very compelling characters that engage with me, whether it's emotionally, intellectually, and sometimes even spiritually. And even in some of the self-help books that I'm going to give at the end, they still have interesting characters. And again, the character is the narrator or the person who was given their biography, but they're interesting and they're engaging. And I'm not saying it's all action. They just have to be engaging. It has to bring thoughts from my head from there. The second criteria is, how do the main characters connect with the side characters? Now, again, like I said, I'm very character driven, so the first 2 criteria are very key to me. However, sometimes side characters and stories, and there's some stories that I will end up going into, that the side characters I like more than the main characters. But probably the reasons why I like them more than main characters, the way they interact with each other, right? The side characters, they may not be too overbearing, but they are there to support the main characters, and sometimes you end up liking them more. So the side characters, or miscellaneous characters, whatever you want to call them, they have to be compelling too. It can't just be all the main character and nobody else. That's something that I really take highly there. All right, so the next one, does it have an engaging plot? Am I engaged throughout the story, right? Now, again, some of the books that I do read, 1,200-page books, they do have some points where it goes a little slow, and that's fine. I'm still engaged though. There's a difference between slow and engaged. And again, if you think about Stormlight Archive, which of course you all know is going to end up on this list somewhere, it's engaging, right? Even in the parts that are considered slower. So don't mistake slower for engaging. But there has to be some points in the book where it's 12 a.m. and I have work the next day, and the book is forcing me to stay up till 2, 3, 4, keeping me engaged. And that's something that I really need in these books. And again, I don't want to mistake slow for not engaging. Slow books are fine. How am I engaged intellectually? Am I engaging with the characters? Am I engaging with a certain part of the plot? Not all action, but it has to be really engaging there. Am I kept on my toes? Am I on the edge of my seat? That's the 4th criteria there. I can't just have a book that's monotonous all the way through. You have to throw a wrench in it for me. It has to be a plot turner or something from that perspective there. That keeps me engaged from that perspective there. Like, I really need to be kept on my toes in some of these books. Again, it doesn't have to be all action. It could be a love story that takes a turn for the worse, right? Again, that's not action. That's more of a love story, but that's something that will keep me on my toes, on the edge of my seat. And then finally, for the 5-star book criteria, that positive feeling or vibe after finishing it. And this may be the top of the top when I think about my 5-star reviews. Is it a book that I get a great vibe from at the end? Is it a book that I sit back and say, wow, like this was incredible. I could read this 20 more times. Give me 14 more of these. And the vibes, I really go off of vibes a lot, but obviously the first 4 criteria needs to be hit too as well. But if the vibe after it is what I feel and it's like, hey, this is a 5-star, it's a 5-star. This is how I do my 5-star books. I am not a librarian. I am not a scholar. So again, take this with a grain of salt. But I've been, again, some of you all do agree on my 5-star and 6-star books. So that's kind of how I rate these books. I'll go over the final 6-star book criteria, which is a 6th added layer to it. That'll go over at the end of the video when we do get to 6-star books. But that is my criteria. Before I go into the books, what are your criteria when it comes to a 5-star book? I'm very curious about this. But without further delay, let's go into all the books that I rated 5-star, and we'll start with fantasy. All right, so these books are in no particular order, and I am not going to go off the top of my head with these books because there are a good amount of books here. So I do have my notes here on my laptop. So if you see me looking down, I look at my laptop. I can't remember all of these books, but I just want to put a warning out there. If you see me looking down, I'm looking at my notes from there. So these books are in no particular order in terms of reading them, but we'll start with fantasy. And the first book on this list that came to mind is The Rage of Dragons. Easily one of my favorite 5-stars from this year. It's African-inspired fantasy that just took me by storm. So you follow a warrior, like I said, African-inspired fantasy, who goes on the craziest revenge tour as he tries to avenge a lot of things that happen in the beginning of the book. Again, this is no spoilers. And he's just so single-sided on getting his revenge. I related his revenge tour to Arya Stark in Game of Thrones and Drake 2016 when he just went on a crazy revenge. And he's on his revenge tour now too as well. But Tal in this book just had a crazy, crazy revenge arc. And it was a great 5-star read for me this year. Fire's Avengers was a great read too as well. And I'm really looking forward to getting more into the series there. Like, it's an absolute incredible series. The Burning series, Evan Winter, incredible author, and Rage Dragons 5-star for sure. Next up on the list, we have Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wong. Now, this is the second book that I read from M.L. Wong, and she's immediately and instantly becoming one of my favorite authors that I've read. And Blood Over Brighthaven is different from The Sword of Kaigen, which, again, that's going to appear in this video somewhere, as you all know, is one of my favorite books. Blood Over Brighthaven is a story that follows a high mage who identifies as a woman, and she is trying to prove herself to be a high mage among the ranks. And she tries to figure out, where magic comes from with an assistant, Tommy, if you know, you know. And she peels back the curtain of what magic is, and it is absolutely insane what magic is and where magic comes from in this story. This was an easy 5-star read for me early this year too as well. Totally love this book. M.L. Wong, huge fan of hers. And I've actually read this book with my book club. Absolutely amazing read. And yeah, that was another one there for sure. The other 5-star book that I kind of want to go into is The Final Empire, Mistborn. The first Mistborn book and one of the first Brandon Sanderson books that I've actually completed. So I told you all the backstory about my Brandon Sanderson journey. Way of Kings was the first book that I read from Brandon Sanderson in 2020. I ended up DNFing it because it just wasn't the right place, right time. The pandemic was happening, and I was more worried about the pandemic. I should have been more worried about Stormlight, Way of Kings, Kaladin, and all those characters. But last year, I said, let me give Brandon Sanderson another chance. And a lot of friends recommended to start with Mistborn. I started Mistborn, The Final Empire, and it's the easiest 5-star ever, and it kept me engaged with the Brandon Sanderson lore, with the Cosmere lore. And in The Final Empire is the first book in the first trilogy of the Mistborn series. In this story, it is a mix between what the bad guy won and a heist. It engages a huge slew of characters. And this is one of my first Brandon Sanderson books, and I understand the Sandwich in this one. I understand that Brandon Sanderson doesn't care if you like characters or not. He's going to do whatever with them that he wants to. The Final Empire was a great read for me last year, and a 5-star for sure. Next up on the list, we'll keep with Brandon Sanderson. It is all of Stormlight, besides one book. So The Way of Kings, 5-star. I think I actually gave like a 5.3. Oathbringer, that was an immediate 5-star too as well. It has the best Samuel Lanch. And Rhythm of War, amazing story too as well. It even mixes some sci-fi and fantasy together in there. That one, superb too as well. Those were all 5 stars. So book 1, 3, 4 were 5 stars. I'm sure you can guess where the second book, Words of Radiance, end up being in that list. Stormlight Archive is my favorite series of all time, and I recommend it to anybody who's looking to get into high epic fantasy. Obviously, don't start there, but if you've been around a little bit, definitely check out Stormlight because It's amazing. And Wind and Truth comes out, in December, and I can only imagine that that's going to be another 5-star. Um, but yeah, all of Stormlight but one is a 5-star, and I'm sure you know where Words of Rating is going to go. So don't have to spend a lot of time on that. All right, next up is Jade City. Jade City was incredible for me. Jade City was a read that I read a couple months ago, actually. And that story was absolutely incredible. When I was reading that story, I immediately thought anime, and it was immediate 5 stars for me because not many books that I read, and not manga, but like actual books that I read where I can think of that my brain immediately goes to anime, and Jade City was one of them. In this one, you follow a family as they live on this land that has jade, and jade is a type of mineral or metal, whatever you want to call it. That these green bones, and green bones are people who can actually use jade and enhance their abilities, just superhuman abilities, so they can run super fast or run through walls or things like that. And this family, you follow them along as they compete with another clan, and Fonda Lee she just breaks your heart every step of the way. And I need to get to Jade War. I need to get to Jade Legacy. I'm in the middle of so many series right now, but this one is a high priority to me, and Jade City for me was perfect. 5 stars for sure. All right. The next one is probably the weirdest 5-star I've given in a while, and that is The Spirit Cuts Through Water. The Spirit Cuts Through Water, first off, I don't even know how to describe the book. I'll tell you this, though. For 50% of the book, I was super confused. I didn't know my up from down. I didn't know what was going on. However, it was straight gas. Straight gas. Once I got through the 50% mark, and I didn't know what was happening, but I kind of got the rhythm of the book. That last 50% in the ending just made it a 5-star for me. I don't recommend this book to everybody, just because, again, some people's criteria for DNF in a book is they want at least 20 or 30% through the book. They're understanding it. They're loving it. I'm going to be the first to tell you, I didn't love Spirit Cuts Through Water the first 20, 30%. But for me, I don't DNF a book until maybe 50, 55%. I give a book a good go. And I was so happy I gave this one a good go because it ended up being a 5-star read for me for sure. So definitely check that out. If you are interested in fantasy that is different than what you've read before, highly recommend. All right. The next one is super interesting, because it is dark gothic vibes that I generally not into. However, the Shepherd King duology, which is One Dark Window and Two Twisted Crowns, is absolutely phenomenal. I gave them both a 5-star. Which is crazy because it's duology. So in this one, without going too far into spoilers there, you follow a cast of characters as they live in this small town that is, I guess you could say, haunted a little bit, but not really haunted. It's just a lot of different things are happening in this town, and they actually have a magical system called Providence cards. And in this Providence cards magical system, if you have a certain card, you're able to do certain things. For example, there's a specific card that enhances your beauty. And in this story, it's just absolutely amazing. And it's hard to kind of describe without going too far into spoilers, but these books actually got me out of reading slump last year, because I was in a huge reading slump because I consider reading slump reading 2 books in a row that are absolute duds. And did I DNF 2 books in a row that are absolute duds. And I picked up One Dark Window, which normally for me, when I think about getting back out of a reading slump, I pick up a book that I'm really used to and that I really love. This one I said, whatever, I'm just going to take a leap of faith, and it ended up being some of my favorite books this year. Rachel Gillig, I low-key wanted a 3rd book, but I understand that there was not a 3rd book in this one. But Shepherd King duology, that's another one there. Yumi and Nightmare Painter was another book that was a 5-star for me too as well. Story is absolutely incredible. Brandon Sanderson wrote a crazy romantic standalone set in the Cosmere. Like, what is this guy's limits? I don't think he has any. However, Yumi and Nightmare Painter was one of my favorite reads this year from a romance standpoint. Now, it's not exclusively romance. Again, you follow Yumi and the Nightmare Painter as they try to, solve the issues with their worlds, and they end up colliding. And again, it's hard to describe these books without going to spoilers. I try to be a spoiler-free channel. Maybe I will start doing spoiler stuff later. But check out Yumi and Nightmare Painter. I actually like Yumi and Nightmare Painter over Trusted Emerald Sea, which is another standalone from Brandon Sanderson. I have not read Sunlit Man yet, but I do have high hopes for Sunlit Man. But Yumi and Nightmare Painter, another 5-star. And then finally, to close out the fantasy section, and I hope I'm not forgetting any fantasy books here, but to finally close the fantasy section, I would be doing myself a disservice if I did not put these books on the list. Now, would I read these books now? Probably not. However, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban and The Order of Phoenix were absolute 5 stars for me back in the day. And if without those books, I'd be lying if I said I would not be here today talking to you about books so passionately that I'm talking to you about books right now, because those two books there, book 3 of the series and Order of Phoenix, I think it's book 5, they really set my love for reading. They really set my love for, you know, some of these page turners, some of these plot twists, even set my love up for the Sanderlanche. The Sanderlanche in Prisoner of Azkaban was absolutely insane. And that's one of those highs that I continue to chase. And I'm finding those highs now, right? Because again, Harry Potter and Prisoner of Azkaban was a long time ago. But I was chasing those highs, and that's how I end up stumbling into some of these fantasy. That's how fantasy ended up being my favorite genre. And fantasy is my favorite genre because it helps me escape real life problems. But there's also so many great life lessons in these, and I would be remiss if I didn't add those to the list. So those are my fantasy books, all my fantasy books that I gave 5 stars to. And yeah, I'm curious what fantasy books you all gave 5 stars to. But moving on. All right, so that was my fantasy stories. Again, fantasy is my favorite genre, but like I said, sci-fi is competing with it. I really go back and forth between fantasy and sci-fi now, when in the past, it was really just all fantasy. But sci-fi is really competing. So in terms of this list, again, I'm using my notes again. Starting off with a banger, Dark Matter. Dark Matter was one of my favorite reads when it comes to sci-fi. I have to, there's so much I can say about Blake Crouch because, again, I read Recursion 2 as well, which may not have been a 5-star, but it was an absolute banger as well. Dark Matter is a story that sticks with me to this day. You follow Jason as he tries to figure out who the real Jason is. And that's all I'm going to say about the book. The story is on Apple TV, actually. They made it into a TV show that I will be checking out this month of September, in terms of whether you see the video or not. So I'm really excited to check that out. But that was an easy 5-star for me, for sure. The next books that I want to go over are 2 books in a series, book 2 and book 3 in a series. And it's in the Red Rising series. Morning Star and Golden Sun. Oh, I should flip them because Golden Sun is the second book and Morning Star is the third book. Wow. And let's talk about Red Rising for a second. So the first book in the series was just okay for me. I didn't really get the hype. I'm like, what are y'all talking about? This is just okay. It's an okay story. And then I got to Golden Sun. And then I got to that part in Golden Sun. And it was given Red Wedding. And if you know, you know. Wow. Golden Sun blew me away. This is a space opera, and you follow Darrow as he goes throughout the universe. You know, he first starts off as somebody with nothing, lesser beginnings. He goes through a tragedy, and he kind of tries to get back too by kind of infiltrating the higher beings that are, you know, in this world, the Golds, I should say. And he just goes absolutely ballistic. He just goes OP. And this is where, like I said in the beginning, this is where those side characters come into play so well. So well. Because these characters in this story, Severo, the side character, he low-key makes the story for me. Really enjoyed him, as well as Mustang too as well. Darrow is obviously, he's that guy, but yeah, Severo for sure. And then Morningstar is just probably the best book in the series so far. I have to read the later half of the series, which I will get to. But holy smokes, those 2 books, easy 5 stars for me, for sure. Next up, we have a new series that I actually rate over Red Rising when it comes to sci-fi. And that is the Sun of the Year series. So book 1, Empire of Silence, I didn't give a 5-star to. It was a 4-star. I appreciate Empire of Silence so much more now because the next book, Howling Dark, was the easiest 5-star I've given in a while. That story, absolutely incredible. So in this story, because Howling Dark is a 5-star for me, Kings of Death is a 5-star for me. So Howling Dark is the 2nd book, Kings of Death is the 4th book. 3rd book, Demon in White. We'll talk about that later. If you know, you know. But in this story, we follow Hadrian Marlowe as he tries to navigate his universe and the universe that he's in right now to figure out his purpose. And in doing that, he becomes this supreme being. in terms of, he actually makes a name for himself. But it doesn't always come with, good favor. And sometimes he gets thrown in situations where you never know how he's going to get out of it. And Empire Silence was good. Great backstory. Howling Dark was absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. I'm going to skip over Demon in White. Kingdoms of Death. I was walking in the airport. I was listening to it and reading at the same time. But in the airport, when I was walking to my gate, and this is one of those, you just remember where you were when you read a certain section. There's a certain part in Kingdoms of Death where just incomprehensible loss after incomprehensible loss after incomprehensible loss. And I got to that part while I was walking in the airport and I had to sit down. Normally when you go to an airport and you check to see if your gate is there, I was on my way to do that. I couldn't do it. I had to sit down and I had to re-listen to that part over and over again to make sure that I wasn't tripping. Easy 5-star too as well. Easy 5-star. Sun Eater series is becoming one of my favorite series of all time. And if you haven't heard from me, I said that it competes with Stormlight on a day-to-day basis in terms of being my favorite series of all time. Stormlight still gets that. But man, Sun Eater is right there. Sun Eater is right there. So Howling Dark, Kings of Death, another 5-star too as well. Next up is a throwback for me, Ready Player One. Ready Player One was absolutely gas for me and is also a book that if I ever come into a reading slump, it's a book I pick up immediately. Immediately. Like, no questions asked. This one is dystopian and it kind of has some, video game, and it doesn't kind of, it has some video game vibes to it. And again, no spoilers of it, but if you haven't checked it out, check it out. Read the book. Read the book. The movie was just okay. It was just okay. But this is my ultimate slump buster. If I ever get into a slump, I pick up Ready Player One because that story sits with me to this day, and it was an easy 5-star for me. I think I gave it a 5-star, in like 2016? And then obviously it's still a 5-star for me. Every time I read it, it's like, it's a 5-star, it's a 5-star, it's a 5-star. So absolute gas. Next up is a newer sci-fi book, Artificial Wisdom. Artificial Wisdom is a newer sci-fi book for me, and debut novel by Thomas Weaver from this year. Absolute gas. Like, that story is absolutely incredible. So you follow a journalist. It's the year 2050. And everything that you can imagine that happens in 2050 happens in 2050. The climate change is change. AI is just more smarter. It's more intelligent. And in this one, it has a lot of sci-fi elements. It has a murder mystery. It has everything involved in it, which, again, as a debut novel, as a debut author, like, that's kind of tough to pull off, and he pulled it off, and it easily was a 5-star for me. That story was absolutely amazing. And then finally, I think you consider this sci-fi. I don't know which way to put it, but wherever you put it, it was a 5-star for me. Chain Gang All-Stars. Chain Gang All-Stars, absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. This is a huge dystopian. So you follow a cast of characters along as I forgot what year it was in this one, but it's years in the future. However, it's very believable. So these characters in this story, they commit heinous crimes, albeit being murder. Most likely it's murder that they've committed, and they're sentenced to jail. But in this jail system, from that perspective there, they can end up getting released if they participate in this program that's really a gladiator program. They can fight other inmates, and by fighting other inmates, they obviously kill these other inmates, and they can rise up the ranking in terms of this system here. But that's not the wild part, because if they end up, getting to the top of the top and they get a good amount of kills, they can end up getting released into the public. No strings attached, no nothing. But there's an even crazier part. This story sets place in terms of, like I said, it's dystopian, but you can end up watching the Olympics 1 second and turn to Chain Gang All-Stars on ESPN next second. It's televised. All this gladiator stuff is televised. Absolutely insane. Easily 5 stars for me too, for sure. So that's the sci-fi section. All the books that I gave 5 stars from a sci-fi section. I hope I'm not forgetting anything. But if you've read some sci-fi books, what books show up for you? I'm sure people are going to say Dune. I'm sure people are going to say other things from there. I only read the first Dune book, which was a great story for sure. I gave the movie probably a 5 stars, but the book for me, I think it was like a 4.5. It was close. It was close. But yeah, those are my sci-fi books, and I'm curious which ones show up for you there from that perspective. All right, so fantasy and sci-fi, those are my 2 favorite genres, but that's not to say I don't read other genres. Thriller being a close third, and self-help being a close fourth, and we'll go through those here. And the first book we're going to talk about is The Kind Worth Killing, which was one of the easiest 5 stars when it came to thriller that there was. In this one, and I won't go too far into the book, but in this one, it begs the question: is killing ever warranted in any situation? Like, should you kill somebody, and is it ever right? That's why it's called The Kind Worth Killing, and it makes you think. I don't think killing should ever be right, but however, in this story, it had me thinking about it, and it was easy 5 star. The next one is Reformatory. So this one actually was a historical fiction thriller, I would say. Another 5 star for me. In this one, this sets place and it's actually something that happened. Some of the parts happened. There were some ghosts in this book that probably didn't happen. You never know though. But it's set in Jim Crow, South Florida, and you follow, 2 siblings. One of the siblings actually gets sent to this reformatory, which is really a jail for boys, delinquent boys, and his sister is on a quest to get him out of there. And in that, there's ghosts, there's trauma, there's drama, there's so much involved in this story that I was really invested in it. And then I looked up the historical facts of this actual story, and it's absolutely heartbreaking because the school that did some of this stuff, and there's a lot of racism involved in this story. The school that did some of this stuff literally just closed its door in I think 2011, which again you can say that's a long time ago, but it's not that far back. And this story set place probably like the 1950s or something like that. It's absolutely heartbreaking. Easy 5 star. Next one, All the Sinners Bleed. All the Sinners Bleed by S.A. Cosby. Oh my gosh, that story was so good. The story was so good. So good. S.A. Cosby, I need to get into more of his work. But All the Sinners Bleed was just tremendous. And I highly recommend that story for sure. I'm not going to go too far into that because I struggle with telling that story without going too far into spoilers there. The Only One Left by Riley Sager was another 5 star for me. Not a lot of people like that story for some reason, but I really like this story. There's a lot of plot twists in The Only One Left. However, I actually really enjoyed that story there. Had some great characters, had me on the edge of my seat all the time. And like I said, those are 2 big criteria for me, and easy 5 stars for me. Along Came a Spider by James Patterson. It was the first book in the Alice Cross series. That actually was a 5 star for me. The next few books were just okay, but that one was an incredible story in the Alice Cross series, and I highly recommend that. At least that first book, and I think it was actually made into a movie too as well, which I actually saw the movie. That wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad at all. All right, so those are the thrillers that I gave 5 stars to. Some of the books that I gave 5 star to was some kind of self-help books. Was Tuesdays with Morrie. Tuesdays with Morrie is another slump buster for me that I always go back to in reading. That book just teaches you how you should live life. I think because of that book is why I do some of the stuff I do today, why I'm so generous, because you just never know when your last day could be, and you want to be remembered as somebody who was really just a good person. And you determine what a good person is. However, there are certain things you should do to be a good person, and in that story, it really gives those away. Next one is Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. David Goggins is somebody who I actually kind of, I guess, not from a reading standpoint, but when it comes from like working out, when it comes from, going through trials and tribulations, overcoming those things, he's somebody who I look up to because that guy, he's been through a lot. And It Can't Hurt Me, he kind of goes through that, but he also goes through like, hey, nobody's going to save you. You have to determine everything you can do from there. Maybe I do take some of that stuff into, I guess, content creation. But Can't Hurt Me was amazing. The second book was amazing too that he wrote there too as well. And then finally, to close out the thrillers and more section, Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey. All right. Wow. That story. I still need to listen to audiobooks. I'm sure Matthew McConaughey does a fantastic job at talking about his story on audio. But another story that will teach you how you should live life, teach you that you should go above and beyond, teach you that you should get out of your comfort zone. And Matthew McConaughey, he really tells this story, and it's really like a biography, low key, but it feels like an actual story. Like I'm with him all along the way, and it's absolutely incredible. So those are my thrillers and more. Again, what are the genres that you gave 5 star books to as well? Let me know. I'm curious about that, so I can check those out. But again, I don't just read fantasy and sci-fi. I do have some 5 stars when it comes to those two as well. All right. And now the moment we've all been waiting for, or at least I've been waiting to tell you all this. My 6-star books. These books transcend the 5-star. These books are books that I will implore you all to read. The 5-star books, I can tell you they're not for everybody. Not for everybody. And some of these books are in the series. These 6-star books in the series too as well. So you probably have to read those 5-star books anyway. But these are 6-star books, books that completely, utterly shattered my scale. To be a 6-star book, you have to have compelling characters. Your main characters have to connect and interact with side characters in a way that keeps me engaged. You have to have an engaging plot. Are there moments while reading that I disregard all responsibilities to finish it? You have to keep me on my toes, edge of my seat for at least part of the book. It doesn't have to be action. It has to be something that keeps me engaged on my toes on the edge of my seat. And again, the 5th thing is the vibes. How do I feel about this book after I'm reading it? Am I jumping through the moon about it? And then for it to be a 6-star book, it needs to do all of that, and make every other book from a 5-star pale in comparison. 6-star books are books that I will recommend to everyone. And once you read them, you would be like, you're right. You're right. It will break your scale too as well. These are the only books that I will fight tooth and nail for in terms of saying, no. These are great books. And even if you don't rate a 6-star, it's at least a 5-star for everybody else. That is how I rate these 6-star books. There are only 6 books on this list. That's 6? Yeah, 6 books on this list that ended up being 6 stars. Let's get into it. So, Hero of Ages. Hero of Ages is the last book of the Mistborn trilogy. So the first book was The Final Empire, which I told you gave a 5-star to. Second book is Well of Ascension. I think I gave that a 4.5. The Hero of Ages was a 6-star book. I am, unfortunately, the Hero of Ages. That book is so quotable. That book put me into a reading slump for 2 weeks. I couldn't read anything for 2 weeks because that book exuded so much perfection. The Hero of Ages, I still think about that ending to this day. To this day, I'm like getting goosebumps, like even thinking about it right now. And I'm so enjoying people who are reading that book, reading that series right now, because those are one of the books that I wish I can go back to read again for the first time. Hero of Ages, absolutely incredible. I need a second. All right, let's go. So the next book is Words of Radiance, and that is the second book in the Stormlight Archive. Easy 6 stars. But it's also my favorite book of all time. That book, absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. So when people get to the Way of Kings and they read it and they're like, oh yeah, this was a good book. It was 1,200 pages. Like, I may waste my time, may not waste my time, but it was a good book. And then they read the Words of Radiance. And this is not just me. They read the Words of Radiance and they're hooked. They are hooked on Stormlight. They are hooked on Brandon Sanderson. The Words of Radiance is the best fantasy book, the best book of all time. It's just so tough to compete with the Words of Radiance. And for anybody who's even questioning reading Stormlight, is it worth it to go through 1,200, 1,300 pages? Yes. Yes, it is. Because Words of Radiance, the second book in that story, it's just absolutely incredible. Kaladin, Dalinar, Shallan, Adolin, they all just have so many great roles in the story. Hoy too as well. Wit, I should say. Words of Radiance. I could go all day about the Words of Radiance. Just absolutely incredible. Brandon Sanderson is just a masterclass at his Sanderlanches, and in that one, there's a crazy Sanderlanche. Just incredible. All right, so let's give you some standalones when it comes to actually a 6-star book, and a standalone that I love to this, just love, and it's a sci-fi, Project Hail Mary. So Project Hail Mary probably actually turned me into a sci-fi lover. I read it early last year and lived up to all the hype. Lives up to all the hype. In this one, you follow along a teacher as he is tasked with, which is so interesting, but he's tasked with saving the Earth. And to save the Earth, he has to travel through space and he has to figure out how to do this. And along the way, he finds a friend, and that friend ends up being one of my favorite characters of all time. Rocky, if you know, you know. Just, oh my goodness sakes. And they're making a movie out of it, which is going to be absolutely incredible. Hopefully they do it right. I know Ryan Gosling is playing Grace. I'd be curious how they do Rocky. Rocky is going to be pivotal to how I view this movie, how they do him. But Project Hail Mary is just so amazing. Just so amazing. If you haven't read Project Hail Mary, you need to. Like, I recommend it to everybody. To everybody. It gets sci-fi, but it's such a great story. Such a great story. My other 6-star book, let's say with a standalone, The Sword of Kaigen. The Sword of Kaigen is not just a 6-star book. It's literally one of my favorite books of all time. M.L. Wong is just absolutely incredible storyteller. In this one, you follow along a family as they live on this thing called the Sword of Kaigen. So it's a strip of land that protects the mainland from foreign invaders. And the government has been lying not only to this family, but the village that this family is a part of, about the threats and the dangers of the enemy that could be coming their way. And in the Japanese-inspired fantasy, the enemy ends up coming their way. There's a mix between Avatar: Last Airbender in this one in terms of samurai and everything from that perspective there, and the magical system. But this story is more than just a fantasy. It's more than just Japanese-inspired fantasy. It's a story about hope. It's a story about the loss of hope. It's a story about love. It's a story about the loss of love. It's the thug tears when it came to this story were just forming right there, page after page after page after page. It's a standalone. People say it's not a standalone. It is a standalone. There's no other books after this, no other books before it. Emma Wong, just not continuing the series, but I think rightfully so. I love the way it ended. This had some of the best main characters, had some of the best side characters. This story was absolutely incredible, and the tears were there. It wasn't even just like forming; they were there for sure, because you get to that part, All right, the next one is The Will of the Many. Will of the Many last year was just absolutely incredible for me. And James Allington, if you're watching this, we need book 2 like ASAP. Like ASAP. Story was absolutely incredible. If you haven't read The Will of the Many, you'll know it's hard to describe it without going too far into details. Just know the magical system is amazing. It deals with like the hierarchy of powers and things like that. And this one is just an absolute incredible story. It defines on will. The characters are amazing. The plot's amazing. It's set between different settings. It goes into school, goes from that perspective there. But The Will of Many, easy 6-star. Again, not go too far into the plot because, again, I think I would ruin it from that perspective there. But I did do a video on it on TikTok. If you want to check that out, definitely check it out. And then finally is my most recent 6-star book, Demon in White, the 3rd book in the Sun Eater series. The Hadrian Marlowe, one of my favorite characters of all time. He just absolutely shines in this story. If you haven't checked out Sun Eater series, you need to check out Sun Eater series. You need to check it out because I want you to read Empire Silence. Again, you just kind of have to get through that. But then get to Howling Dark, which is absolutely incredible, 5-star. And then Demon in White, you're going to be blown away and be hooked on this series. So yeah, those are my 6-star books. Let me know if any of those books are 6-star books for you, or books that you came across that end up breaking your scale and transcending everything that you've ever read there for sure. So in closing, those are all my 5+ star books that I've read. I hope I haven't forgotten any. If I have forgotten any, I hope you all let me know if I said some other books that I missed from that perspective. All these books are going to be listed on my Amazon storefront because, again, while I do use a library, there are some books that I must have on my shelves, and I'm sure you see some of them on my shelves here. So if you want to buy in those books, you can go through there, or you can go to the library and get them from that perspective there. But yeah, those are all the books that I've given 5+ stars to, and even some books I gave the elusive 6-star book rating to. Like I said, curious what yours are. And as always, everyone, happy reading.